What if you woke up in a sterile room, with no idea who you were, alone, adrift in space, and the only other people near you were long dead? This is the beginning of Project Hail Mary, a science fiction novel by Andy Weir. But it's more than just a space survival story. It's a mystery, a character study, a celebration of science, and, at its heart, a story about connection. The protagonist, Ryland Grace, doesn't remember his name at first. He doesn't know where he is or why he's there. The only certainty is that something has gone terribly wrong. Slowly, piece by piece, he begins to remember. Not just who he is, but what's at stake. Earth is in danger. A microbial life form known as astrophage is draining energy from the sun, threatening to plunge the planet into a frozen death. The mission was humanity's last hope, a one-way trip to the stars in search of a solution. But Ryland Grace didn't volunteer. He didn't choose to be humanity's savior. And he's not the only one out there. As we follow his journey across memory, time, and light years, we uncover not just the mechanics of survival, but the deeper meaning of sacrifice, ingenuity, and an unlikely friendship that transcends worlds. This is the story of Project Hail Mary. Part 1. Awakening in the Void. Ryland Grace opens his eyes to a harsh, clinical light. His vision blurs, his body feels weak, and his thoughts are scattered. A rhythmic beeping plays in the background as he slowly tries to understand his surroundings. Everything feels unfamiliar. Sterile walls, smooth panels, a curved ceiling, and medical tubes attached to his skin. Then he notices the two beds nearby. Each one holds a lifeless body, still, silent, and clearly long dead. The scent in the air is faint, but it carries a trace of decay. Panic rises. He fumbles with the restraints, breath catching in his throat. Alarms chirp as he disconnects the lines. He collapses to the floor, too weak to stand. Every movement is sluggish, as though his muscles are waking up for the first time in years. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know where he is. But he knows that something is very wrong. He rests, finds water and food paste, and begins to recover. Over time, his strength returns. He explores the narrow corridors, floating occasionally when the artificial gravity cuts out. Everything about the place confirms one thing: he is aboard a spacecraft. And this is no Earth orbit. Outside the windows, there are no familiar stars or landmarks, just deep space and silence. He is alone. The ship's computer responds to some of his questions, though much of the information is locked. But one name breaks through: Hail Mary. The phrase unsettles him, not because of its religious origin, but because of what it implies. This is a mission of last resort. Slowly, his instincts take over. He begins testing systems, calibrating instruments, and reviewing data. His memory is gone, but his knowledge isn't. He remembers how to think scientifically, how to troubleshoot, how to survive. He inspects the ship's systems. The propulsion runs on something called astrophage, a dark, energy-dense biological organism. The name unlocks more memories: headlines, labs, emergency meetings. Astrophage had been discovered in the sun's corona, absorbing solar energy and returning it to Venus. It was growing, multiplying, and dimming the sun itself. The consequences were global. As the sun weakened, the Earth began to cool. Crop failures, climate collapse, and an eventual extinction event loomed within decades. The world responded in panic and in unity. He recalls emergency summits, the formation of a planetary task force, and the appointment of one leader, Eva Strat. She was direct, unflinching, and operated with absolute authority. Nations deferred to her. Scientists answered to her. She acted swiftly because time was running out. Strat didn't find Grace by accident. Years earlier, he had published a controversial paper suggesting that life could evolve without water. It was mocked, and his academic career ended. He became a middle school science teacher, content to stay out of the spotlight, until astrophage proved his theory right. Strat pulled him back into research. At first he resisted, but eventually he joined the effort, quietly, reluctantly. He studied the biology of this alien microbe, learned how it stored solar energy, how it moved, how it multiplied. And then, one anomaly changed everything: Tau Ceti. A nearby star, just 12 light-years away, showed no signs of dimming. While every other star was losing energy, this one remained stable. It became Earth's last hope. The plan was ambitious: build a ship powered by astrophage, send it to Tau Ceti, find the answer, return the solution to Earth, if there was one. It was a one-way trip, a mission of desperation. Back on the ship, Grace discovers the sleep pods. Yao and Ilyukina, the other crew members, are dead. Their bodies lie preserved in low oxygen. Something failed during the hibernation process. He wasn't meant to be here. He was the support staff, not the primary crew. He had trained the astronauts, prepared simulations, and designed the protocols. But when the primary crew died in testing, there was no time to replace them. Strat made the call. He remembers her standing over him in a sterile room, calm, final. "You'll save them," she said, "even if you hate me for it." She had him sedated and launched without his consent. Not because he was willing, but because he was capable. Now, awake and alone, Grace walks the ship with the weight of Earth on his shoulders. He feels grief for the lives lost, anger at the betrayal, fear of failure. But he also feels something else: purpose. He begins to work. He scans the Tau Ceti system, searching for anomalies. One planet draws his attention. It orbits much closer to the star than expected, but it remains surprisingly cool. It defies known physics. He names it Adrian. He sends a probe to study its atmosphere, track its chemical signatures, and record its energy readings. There is no one to help him. No one is watching. But he pushes forward. Ryland Grace, once a teacher, once a scientist, is now the last hope for Earth. And step by step, memory by memory, he begins to rediscover who he is. He is not a soldier, not a hero, but he is a survivor, and he is not giving up. Part 2. The Mission and the Past. As Ryland Grace navigates the halls of the Hail Mary, fragments of memory continue to surface. They don't arrive in order, and they aren't always clear, but each one adds a piece to the puzzle of how he ended up here, drifting alone, 12 light-years from Earth. He remembers the first signs of the disaster. It began when solar observatories detected subtle but consistent dimming of the sun. At first, scientists thought it was a data error, but the pattern held, and soon the cause became clear. The culprit was biological, a microorganism later named astrophage. It thrived in extreme temperatures near Venus, absorbing solar energy and returning it to the sun in great arcs, creating a feedback loop that robbed the planet of light and heat. The implications were terrifying. As the sun weakened, the Earth began to cool. At first, the change was slow, but models quickly predicted catastrophic collapse within decades. Crops would fail, ecosystems would die, and humanity would face extinction. In response, the world united. The United Nations granted full authority to one person, Ava Strat. She wasn't chosen for diplomacy. She was chosen to act. Strat's methods were controversial. She bypassed regulations, seized resources, and dissolved any barriers that stood in the way. The mission was never about politics. It was about survival. Ryland Grace had nothing to do with that world anymore. Years earlier, he'd left academia after publishing a paper that questioned one of biology's most basic assumptions, that life required water. The paper was mocked and his reputation collapsed. He became a middle school science teacher, quietly rebuilding his life. Then came astrophage. The organism didn't need water. It stored energy more efficiently than anything known on Earth. It could survive in space, reproduce, and travel at relativistic speeds. Grace's theory, once dismissed, suddenly mattered. His experience with extremophiles made him unexpectedly valuable. Strat tracked him down and asked for help. He resisted at first, but as the global crisis deepened, he agreed. What followed was the largest international scientific collaboration in history. Researchers from every nation worked together to study astrophage, its biology, its behavior, its vulnerabilities. They discovered it could be harnessed as a fuel source. It could power a ship all the way to another star. That ship became the Hail Mary. Its purpose was simple: reach Tau Ceti, the only nearby star unaffected by astrophage, and find out why. The mission was one way. The journey would take over a decade, and the crew would be placed in hibernation for the duration. There was no return plan. If a solution was found, the ship would transmit data back to Earth. Grace wasn't meant to be on board. His job was to train the crew, Commander Yao, a seasoned pilot, and Ilyukina, a brilliant engineer. He ran simulations, built models, and explain the science. But late in the process, disaster struck. One of the hibernation pods failed during a systems check. The safety of the crew was suddenly in question, and the launch window was closing. Strat made a decision. She expanded the crew pool. Grace became an official backup, still just for training, or so he thought. Then the worst happened. Part of the primary crew died during final cryo testing. There was no time to recruit replacements. Against his wishes, Strat sedated Grace and placed him in hibernation. He was launched with the crew aboard the Hail Mary, not because he agreed, not because he volunteered, but because he was the best remaining option. Now, alone on the ship, he walks the corridors and recalls those final choices. He passes the pods where Yao and Ilyukina remain, their bodies preserved by vacuum. He studies the logs, the diagnostics, the mission records. He understands why he's here, not by accident, but by necessity. He gets to work. He studies the Tau Ceti system, scanning its planets. One of them, a small world orbiting unusually close to the star, draws his attention. The planet remains far cooler than it should be at that distance. Grace names it Adrian. He sends a probe to investigate. It collects atmospheric samples and begins transmitting data. Then, something unexpected happens. The Hail Mary detects rhythmic pulses in the infrared spectrum, regular, repeating signals that follow mathematical patterns. They're not coming from Adrian, they're coming from space. Grace isolates the signal and confirms it. It's not natural. It's a message. Shortly after, the ship's sensors detect movement. A second vessel appears, smaller than the Hail Mary, clearly non-human in design. It approaches slowly, matching velocity. Its propulsion signature shows traces of astrophage, the same fuel that powers Grace's ship. He watches in silence as the ship draws closer. He was sent here to face the unknown. He was prepared for solitude, for technical failures, for sacrifice. But nothing could have prepared him for this. He's not alone. Part 3, First Contact. Ryland Grace sits at the console of the Hail Mary, eyes fixed on the monitor. Outside the ship, an alien vessel hovers silently. It's sleek, compact, and unlike anything humanity has ever built. It moves with purpose, trailing faint signs of astrophage propulsion, an unmistakable clue that its builders are facing a crisis similar to Earth's. Grace watches as lights blink from the alien ship in a deliberate pattern. It's not random, it's not a malfunction, it's communication. He responds with pulses from the Hail Mary's exterior lights. Simple sequences at first. One flash, then two, then three, prime numbers, a shared language grounded in math. The alien ship answers back. Over the following days, they exchange information through light pulses, using universal constants like pi and the speed of light. Slowly, they build a foundation of understanding. It's slow and imperfect, but it works. Eventually, the alien ship maneuvers closer. A tunnel extends between the two airlocks, carefully pressurized to prevent contamination. Grace prepares for contact, unsure of what he'll encounter. He doesn't know what atmosphere the alien breathes or how it will behave. But curiosity outweighs caution. The connection stabilizes. And then, from the far side, the alien enters. It moves deliberately on 5 limbs, its body low and dense, covered in a rock-like carapace. It doesn't speak in words, but emits rhythmic pulses, clicks and tones that vibrate through the air. Its language is sonic and structured around harmonics. Grace decides to call him Rocky. The name fits. The alien's mineral-like appearance and grounded movements make the choice feel natural. Rocky doesn't object, and soon, the name sticks. With help from the ship's computer and their shared understanding of physics, they begin translating simple ideas into harmonic sounds. They build a vocabulary: oxygen, mass, thrust, temperature. Slowly, their conversations grow more complex. Grace learns that Rocky breathes ammonia and lives under high pressure. His biology is so different that sharing air would be fatal. To solve this, Grace constructs a sealed compartment inside the Hail Mary, a high-pressure, ammonia-filled habitat where Rocky can live and work. Communication becomes easier. Rocky explains that he's from a star system called Arid, many light years away. His people face the same threat. Astrophage is dimming their sun. Like Earth, they launched a last-chance mission to Tau Ceti, the only nearby star that's unaffected. The meeting point between their two worlds is Adrian, a small planet orbiting Tau Ceti. Something about Adrian's atmosphere resists the astrophage threat. Both ships were sent here to find out why. Grace is stunned. Across the universe, another intelligent species followed a similar path. They built a ship, sent a crew, and searched for answers. And like him, Rocky is the only survivor. They are now the last representatives of their civilizations. Despite their differences, the common ground is powerful: survival, curiosity, and a need for cooperation. They begin to work together. Grace shares his data on Adrian and astrophage. Rocky provides scans from his own instruments, which are built differently but point to the same mystery. Together, they study the planet's atmosphere and energy profiles. Then they find it. Floating in Adrian's upper atmosphere is a microscopic life form. It feeds on astrophage. Grace names it Taumoeba. It's fast, efficient, and surprisingly simple. A natural predator for the very organism threatening both worlds. But there's a catch. Taumoeba can't survive outside Adrian's environment. When removed, it dies quickly. It's not the solution yet, but it's the closest thing they've found to hope. They begin testing. Grace modifies containment units and environmental controls. Rocky contributes Iridian tools to manage pressure and chemical balance. Together, they adjust temperature, air composition, and exposure time, trying to nudge Taumoeba toward greater tolerance. As they work, their relationship deepens. What began as cautious diplomacy becomes real friendship. They joke, share stories, and learn about each other's cultures. Grace hears about Arid's communal knowledge systems and harmonic-based society. Rocky learns about Earth, its languages, oceans, and music. Their bond becomes the emotional core of the mission. In Rocky, Grace finds a companion, someone who understands the weight of being alone, the burden of representing an entire world. In Grace, Rocky finds not just a colleague, but a friend. They push forward. Each test brings new insights. They isolate strains of Taumoeba that survive longer under altered conditions. They build a tiny ecosystem that mimics Adrian, then slowly shift the variables to see what the microbe can handle. Some tests succeed, others fail, but every failure brings them closer to understanding. Then Grace remembers something important. The Hail Mary is powered by astrophage. If Taumoeba were to escape and reach the fuel stores, it could consume them in minutes. That would end the mission, and strand both of them in deep space. The risk is enormous. They begin building new safety protocols. Enzyme-based kill switches, triggered inhibitors, biological locks that prevent Taumoeba from reproducing outside carefully controlled zones. The process is tedious, but vital. And yet, despite the constant danger, there is progress. Grace feels it in the rhythm of their work, in the patterns of their speech, in the quiet confidence that grows with every successful test. The mission, once defined by isolation, has become something else entirely. It's no longer just about Earth or Arid. It's about the bond between two unlikely friends who refuse to give up. For the first time since waking in the dark, Ryland Grace believes they might actually succeed. Part 4. Breakthroughs and Sacrifices. Ryland Grace and Rocky had grown into a true partnership. What started as hesitant collaboration between two strangers, two entirely different life forms, had evolved into a seamless working relationship. They shared ideas without ego, solved problems with combined ingenuity, and worked long hours side by side, driven by the same goal: to find a version of Taumoeba that could survive beyond the protective atmosphere of Adrian. Every day brought new experiments. Grace focused on atmospheric simulations, tweaking the gas composition and temperature inside containment chambers. Rocky brought his own expertise, modifying Iridian-designed equipment to help maintain pressure and monitor chemical shifts. They ran test after test, trying to gradually stretch the microbe's adaptability without killing it. Sometimes they made progress. More often, they encountered failure. But neither of them gave up. Eventually, after countless trials, they isolated a promising strain. This version of Taumoeba could tolerate higher pressure fluctuations and even brief exposure to non-Adrian conditions. It wasn't robust enough to survive indefinitely in Earth's or Arid's atmospheres, but it showed potential. For the first time, Grace believed they were on the verge of something meaningful, a modified version of this strain, properly housed and protected, might be able to reach their home planets and start the work of restoring both stars. The next step was delivery. Together, they designed a fleet of probes, each one custom-built to carry a carefully measured Talmaweba payload. Grace handled the navigation software and long-range transmission systems, while Rocky contributed thermal control elements and a brilliant containment system based on Iridian biochemistry. Each probe would maintain an inert atmosphere until it arrived at its target, then deploy the microbes into the solar environment. Throughout the design process, one truth remained front and center. Talmaweba could not be allowed to interact with their ship's astrophage fuel. A single breach, a moment of exposure, and their entire propulsion systems could be consumed in minutes. The probes were built with redundancy in mind. Layered barriers, chemical inhibitors, temperature controls, and kill switches were all integrated. They tested every scenario they could think of. And still, things went wrong. During a final sterilization procedure aboard Rocky's ship, one of the lab modules suffered a partial containment failure. A valve jammed. Pressure rose too quickly. Talmaweba spilled into the air. Grace, who had been helping prepare equipment inside the Iridian lab, reacted instinctively. He rushed to the console and activated the manual heating override, exposing the area to temperatures high enough to kill the microbes. In the process, he burned his hand badly. The controls hadn't been designed for humans. The metal casing scorched through his glove and seared his skin. He completed the sterilization process, made sure the system was safe, and collapsed against the wall, gritting his teeth through the pain. Rocky responded immediately. He carried Grace back through the transfer tunnel and began treatment using Iridian medical supplies. Grace was groggy but conscious, half laughing at his own mistake. His hand blistered quickly, and 2 fingers lost partial function. It hurt, but not nearly as much as the thought of what might have happened if he'd been a few seconds slower. After a few days of recovery, Grace was back at work. His hand still ached, and his grip was weak, but he adapted. Rocky never mentioned the injury again, though he adjusted their workflow to compensate without needing to be asked. Finally, after weeks of refinement and testing, the probes were ready. They launched them in sequence, one at a time. Each probe was aimed toward Earth or arid, loaded with instructions, microbial samples, and technical data. The probes carried no guarantees. They might be intercepted, they might fail. But it was their best chance, perhaps the only chance, to bring salvation back to their people. For a while, there was a sense of calm. The work was done. The samples were in motion. The mission, at least the scientific part of it, had succeeded. Then came the diagnostics. As Grace prepared the Hail Mary for departure, he ran a final fuel analysis. The numbers were wrong. At first, he thought it was a calibration issue, maybe a sensor failure. But after cross-checking systems and running simulations, the truth became clear. He didn't have enough fuel to return to Earth. The detour to help Rocky earlier in the mission, the burn that had altered his course and cost him precious astrophage, had left him with too little reserve to complete the journey home. He didn't say anything at first. Rocky was prepping his own ship, confident in his trajectory back to Arid. Grace considered keeping quiet, letting his friend depart in peace. But that wasn't who he was anymore, so he told him. Rocky was furious, not at Grace, but at the situation. He offered suggestions, alternative routing, even the idea of launching a shared return vessel. Grace ran the numbers, but nothing worked. Any attempt to reroute now would risk both ships. Eventually, Rocky accepted the truth, that Grace wouldn't be able to make it home. He insisted that Grace remain aboard the Hail Mary, conserve oxygen, and continue broadcasting messages toward Earth. Maybe someone would intercept them. Maybe someone would help. But Grace had already made his decision. He plotted a new course, not toward Earth, but back to Arid. It was the only place within range, and it held the only people, or rather, the only beings, who might be able to help him. And more than that, it was where Rocky would be. Grace didn't know if he'd survive the trip. He didn't know if he'd be welcomed, or if he'd even be conscious by the time he arrived. But he turned the ship. He set the new trajectory. He locked in the systems. And he began the long, lonely journey toward an alien world, light years from home. Not because he expected reward, not because he was giving up, but because sometimes the right thing to do isn't the one you planned for. It's the one you choose when there's nothing left but the choice. If he can't save Earth, he can at least ensure Rocky's mission succeeds. Maybe help the Iridians stabilize their sun. Maybe continue the work. Maybe, just maybe, find meaning in the effort. The journey is slow. Grace is forced to remain in a makeshift sealed compartment tailored to human survival. A narrow margin of breathable air and radiation shielding. His muscles waste away. His food supply dwindles. His days blur. But he endures. By the time he reaches Arid, he is near death. But Rocky finds him. The Iridians pull him aboard, their systems already adapted for his biology. They treat his failing body with scientific precision and gentle care. Grace drifts in and out of consciousness, memories mixing with hallucinations, earthquakes of sound, harmonic voices, the scent of lab chemicals, the glimmer of a classroom projector. Time passes in fragments, and then he wakes. He's alive on another world. And Rocky is there. Their reunion is quiet, reverent. Rocky hums in tones Grace now understands instinctively. Tones of concern, of joy, of welcome. Grace breathes, moves, eats, learns. His body recovers slowly. The Iridians build a chamber where he can live comfortably. A hybrid environment, not quite Earth, not quite Arid, but something in between. Soon he begins to work again. Together, Grace and Rocky refine Taumoeba for their star's unique needs. They develop inoculation protocols for Arid's infrastructure. Grace shares everything he knows about human science, while learning the intricate details of Iridian systems, built around harmonic vibrations and crystalline data matrices. He becomes an educator, a collaborator, and, unexpectedly, a hero. The Iridians treat him not just with gratitude, but with reverence. Stories of the strange visitor from a dying blue planet spread. Children learn his name in a new tone scale. His lab becomes a symbol of resilience and unity. He sends transmissions back toward Earth. Simple messages, compressed packets containing science, coordinates, records of their success. He doesn't know if they'll be received. Maybe Earth survived, maybe not. It doesn't matter. He tried, he did what he could, and that's enough. Years pass. Grace builds a new lab, nestled in an underground facility beneath the warm core of Arid. He decorates it with fragments of the Hail Mary, a cracked sample container, a bent solar panel bracket, a worn patch from his jumpsuit. He even has a carving Rocky gave him, a small crystalline charm etched with their initials in both languages. Human and Iridian, teacher and student, friend and friend. He teaches young Iridians about chemistry and physics, about the structure of atoms and the nature of light. He tells them about Earth, not with sorrow, but with affection, about oceans and clouds and baseball and coffee, about students and stubborn administrators and a woman named Strat who once gave him an impossible mission. He doesn't forget Earth, but he doesn't mourn it either, because on this alien world, under an unfamiliar sky, he has found something he thought he'd lost forever: purpose and peace. And that brings us to the end of Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Let me know in the comments what book or series you'd like to hear next. Don't forget to subscribe and click the like button. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next one.